Altitude sickness doesn't start with screaming. It starts with the smell of burnt copper and a sudden, terrible silence. Flight 402 was 6 miles above the Atlantic when the engines choked. 239 people began praying. In seat 14B, a combat pilot just sighed, took off her headphones, and stood up. 6 hours into the transatlantic flight, the air inside the Boeing 777 tasted like recycled breath and stale coffee. Camilla Hastings sat perfectly still in the middle seat, her knees pressed tight together to avoid brushing against the large, loudly snoring man in 14C. His cologne smelled like synthetic pine and desperation. Against the window, a teenager was endlessly scrolling through downloaded videos on a blindingly bright tablet. Camilla hated commercial flying. She hated being a passenger. It meant surrendering control, wrapping herself in a scratchy polyester blanket, and trusting her life to someone she had never met, sitting behind a locked, reinforced door. In an F-35 cockpit, she wore the plane like a second skin. Every vibration translated through the flight stick directly into her nervous system. Here, she was just cargo, meat in a pressurized aluminum tube. She adjusted the air nozzle above her head, letting the thin, cold stream hit her face. Her hands were slightly unsteady. They had been ever since her final tour in the Mediterranean. She wasn't terrified. She was just incredibly, bone-deep tired. She closed her eyes, trying to isolate the steady, droning hum of the twin turbofan engines outside. It was a grounding technique her therapist had suggested. Listen to the machine. The machine is working. Until suddenly, it wasn't. A violent shudder racked the airframe. It wasn't the rhythmic bumping of clear air turbulence. It was a single, massive jolt, like hitting a concrete wall at 500 miles an hour. The snoring man snorted awake. The teenager's tablet clattered to the floor. Camilla's eyes snapped open. The low, comforting hum of the engines pitched up into an agonizing, high-frequency whine, then chopped out completely. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The cabin lights flickered, dimmed to a sickly yellow emergency glow, and died. Gravity simply stopped existing. Camilla's stomach slammed into her ribs. Her plastic cup of lukewarm ginger ale lifted off her tray table, suspended in mid-air for a beautiful, terrifying second. A sphere of brown liquid hovered before her eyes, reflecting the dim emergency strip lighting on the floor. Then, the nose of the plane tipped downward, and gravity returned with a vengeance. The ginger ale smashed into her lap. Camilla let out a sharp, irritated hiss, staring at the cold, sticky stain spreading across her jeans. She wasn't panicking about the plunge. She was furious about the mess. Her reaction was purely defensive. Anger was an easier emotion to process than the primal terror bubbling up in the back of her throat. Above them, the overhead compartments rattled violently. Several popped open, vomiting luggage into the aisles. A heavy hard-shell suitcase caught a woman in the aisle seat directly on the shoulder, cracking her collarbone with a sickening pop that Camilla could hear even over the rising crescendo of screams. Then came the mechanical clack, clack, clack of the overhead panels deploying. The yellow oxygen masks dropped, swinging on their plastic tubes like dead, rubbery fruit. "Put it on! Put it on!" the snoring man yelled, fumbling blindly with the elastic straps. His elbow cracked hard into Camilla's ribs. She grunted, shoving him away with a stiff arm. She grabbed her own mask. It smelled overwhelmingly of old talcum powder and warm rubber. She strapped it to her face, tightening the strings. The flow of oxygen was sharp and metallic. She didn't bother helping the man next to her. He had managed to tangle his mask around his chin and was hyperventilating, but he was breathing. Camilla looked out the window. The horizon line, visible through a break in the heavy cloud cover, was completely wrong. It was tilted at a severe 30-degree angle and rising fast. They weren't just falling. They were banking into a death spiral. She waited for the intercom to crackle. She waited for the calm, manufactured baritone of the captain telling them it was a minor technical issue, to remain seated, to brace. Nothing, just the rushing roar of air tearing past the fuselage and the panicked, ragged breathing of 239 people. Camilla leaned forward, straining against her seatbelt. At the front of the cabin, pinned against the forward bulkhead by the steep angle of the floor, was a flight attendant. Her name tag read Sarah. She looked young, maybe 22, her hands pressed flat against the wall, her eyes wide and perfectly white in the dim cabin. Sarah was staring at the reinforced cockpit door. A thin, dark wisp of smoke was curling out from beneath the gap at the bottom of the door. Electrical fire, Camilla thought. The acrid scent reached her a second later, biting through the plastic oxygen mask, melting wire insulation and burning circuit boards. It was a smell that dug straight into her brain, triggering a flashback of a smoking console over the Syrian desert. She squeezed her eyes shut. Not my plane. Not my problem. The aircraft shuddered again, violently losing another 1,000 feet. The G-forces pressed Camilla deep into the unyielding foam of her seat. Fine, she thought, a bitter, exhausted resentment flaring in her chest. I guess it's my problem. Camilla unbuckled her seatbelt. The man next to her grabbed her wrist. His fingers were slick with nervous grease. What are you doing? You have to stay seated. Let go of me, she said, her voice muffled by the plastic mask. It wasn't a request. It was a flat, dead-eyed command. He dropped her wrist. Standing up was like moving underwater. The steep, downward pitch of the floor meant she had to grab the backs of the headrests to haul herself forward. Her combat boots slipped on spilled drinks and discarded magazines. People were grabbing at her legs, begging, crying, praying in 6 languages. She ignored them. Empathy was a luxury that cost seconds, and seconds were altitude. Right now, altitude was running out. She reached the forward galley. Sarah, the flight attendant, was paralyzed, staring at the wisp of smoke. "Code!" Camilla barked, pulling down her oxygen mask so she could be heard over the deafening rush of the slipstream. Sarah just blinked, her chest heaving. "Captain!" Camilla didn't have time for bedside manner. She grabbed Sarah by the shoulders, her grip bruisingly tight, and slammed her back against the bulkhead to snap her out of the shock. "The door code! Give it to me! Now!" I can't. It's..." Sarah stammered, tears cutting tracks through her makeup. "It's secured. If they don't authorize from the inside, they aren't authorizing anything. They're choking on halon and burning plastic. Use the emergency override." Sarah's trembling hand reached for the keypad beside the door. She punched in a sequence of numbers. A red light flashed. She did it again. Green. A high-pitched chime sounded, and the heavy, bulletproof door clicked open an inch. Camilla shoved Sarah aside and kicked the door inward. The cockpit didn't look like a flight deck. It looked like the inside of a crematorium. Thick, caustic grey smoke billowed out into the galley, stinging Camilla's eyes instantly. The air was violently hot, carrying the distinct metallic flavor of fried avionics and ionized air. She coughed, a harsh, tearing sound in her throat, and dropped to her hands and knees, crawling beneath the thickest layer of the smoke to see. The noise inside the small space was maddening. Alarms were blaring over each other, a chaotic symphony of disaster. The loud synthetic beep, beep, beep of the master caution alarm mixed with a computerized voice calmly repeating, "Terrain, pull up! Terrain, pull up!" Captain Damien Howard was slumped entirely forward in the left seat. His head rested heavily against the primary flight display, cracking the glass. He was unresponsive, a dark smudge of soot covering his face. In the right seat, First Officer Ben Williams was awake, but completely useless. He had managed to get his emergency oxygen mask half on, but the strap was twisted. He was clawing frantically at his throat, eyes streaming, hyperventilating so hard he was essentially suffocating himself. His hands were nowhere near the controls. They were curled into tight, trembling fists against his chest. The control columns, the heavy, ribbed yokes, were violently shaking, the stick shaker. It was a physical warning that the aircraft was stalling, losing the lift required to stay airborne. Camilla stood up, coughing again, wiping tears of irritation and smoke from her eyes. She didn't feel a rush of adrenaline or heroic purpose. She felt a deep, profound annoyance at the sheer mess of it all. This wasn't a sleek fighter jet. This was a cumbersome flying apartment building, weighing 300,000 pounds, and it was currently a brick. She squeezed past the center console, her hip catching sharply on a protruding knob. Pain flared, and she hissed a curse. "Move!" she growled at Williams. The first officer didn't register her. He was staring blindly ahead at the artificial horizon, which was currently mostly brown, indicating they were pointed at the earth. Camilla stepped behind the captain's seat. She grabbed Damien Howard by the shoulders of his uniform. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. She braced her boots against the floor and yanked backward. He didn't budge. The seat harness locked. "Damn it," she muttered. She fumbled blindly through the smoke, her fingers tracing the nylon straps until she found the heavy metal buckle at his waist. She twisted it, popping it open. Taking a deep breath of the foul air, she hooked her arms under Howard's armpits and pulled with everything she had. He slid backward out of the seat, a heavy mass that sent them both crashing against the reinforced cockpit door behind them. She rolled his unconscious body out of the way, leaving him on the floor, grating. Camilla slid into the left seat. The sheepskin cover was still damp with the captain's sweat. It made her skin crawl. She ignored it, slamming her feet onto the rudder pedals. They felt miles away. She pulled the lever to adjust the seat forward, locking herself in. She reached out and gripped the yoke. It was cold, rigid plastic, ribbed for grip. The moment her hands closed around it, the aggressive vibration of the stick shaker vibrated up her arms, rattling her teeth in her skull. It felt absolutely alien. An F-35 had a side stick, minimal movement, maximum fly-by-wire response. This required muscle. She pushed forward on the yoke. "Terrain! Pull up!" To recover from a stall, you don't pull back. You push the nose down to gain airspeed over the wings. But they were already descending rapidly, the altimeter spinning downward like a slot machine. 30,000 feet. 28. 25. She glanced at the center console. The autothrottle was engaged, fighting the stall in a confused loop. She slapped the disconnect button on the throttles. A new chime joined the chaotic noise. She manually pushed the heavy thrust levers forward. The engines, what was left of them, responded with a sluggish, uneven roar. She keyed the mic on the yoke. "Boston Center, Flight 402, declaring an emergency." Her voice was cold, clipped, lacking any of the panic that usually flooded civilian channels during a crisis. It was a voice forged over active war zones. Static hissed through her headset. Then, a frantic voice cut through. "Flight 402, Boston Center, we show you descending through 20,000 feet at 6,000 feet per minute. Say intentions. We lost your transponder." Camilla braced her boots against the rudder pedals. The physical strain of fighting the heavy airframe was already making her shoulders burn. "Captain is incapacitated. First officer is combat ineffective. Fire in the forward avionics bay. I am taking manual control." There was a pause on the radio. The controller in the tower was trying to process the information. 402. Say again. Who is at the controls? Is there a relief pilot? Camilla's jaw tightened. She wrapped her fingers tighter around the yoke. The artificial horizon was slowly leveling, but the aircraft was sluggish, fighting her every input. It felt like trying to steer a cruise ship with a wooden paddle. "Negative," Camilla said, her eyes scanning the dizzying array of analog dials and digital readouts. "Just a passenger." The radio went completely dead, silence from the tower. Not static, just dead. Stunned silence. They had muted their mics, likely scrambling supervisors, realizing they were currently talking to a ghost flight. "Wake up, you heavy piece of trash!" Camilla grunted under her breath, ignoring the radio silence. She didn't need their permission to fly. She planted both feet firmly, locked her elbows, and began the agonizing physical process of hauling the nose of the Boeing 777 back up toward the sky. The metal frame of the aircraft groaned, a terrifying, creaking sound that vibrated through the floorboards. She wasn't trying to save the day. She just really wanted to go home. Boston Center did not reply immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the harsh mechanical breathing of the damaged aircraft. Camilla kept her boots planted on the rudder pedals, her calves screaming under the tension. The yoke was a chunk of dead iron in her hands. Commercial jets were not built for aggressive maneuvers. They were designed to glide along invisible highways in the sky, managed by computers and gentle suggestions from autopilot. Forcing a Boeing 777 out of a nosedive with pure muscle was like trying to wrestle a city bus out of a ditch. Her forearms burned. A sharp, localized ache took root between her shoulder blades, radiating up her neck. She dialed the trim wheel on the center console, trying to relieve the intense forward pressure on the control column, but the electrical response was sluggish. The fire in the forward avionics bay had clearly chewed through secondary bundles. "Center, 402. Camilla keyed the mic again, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. "I need a vector. I have an injured captain, an incapacitated first officer, and one operating engine. I am not asking for permission to fly this route. I am telling you to clear the airspace." Static hissed. Then a new voice broke through. Older, steadier, but with a slight, betraying tremor underneath the professional cadence. "Flight 402, this is Boston Center Supervisor. We rid you. Radar contact lost, but we have your primary skin paint. You are currently descending through 14,000. We have JFK cleared, runway 4 left." "Negative JFK," Camilla interrupted. She scanned the navigational display. It was flickering, but the raw data was still there. "We are losing altitude too fast. I don't have the glide ratio for New York. Give me Halifax. Stanfield International. It's off my left wing." A pause. 402. Halifax is reporting heavy crosswinds, 0 visibility. "I don't care if they're reporting a localized apocalypse. I don't have the fuel or the altitude for anything else. Give me the heading. Turn left heading 040. Descend and maintain 10,000, if able." Camilla banked the yoke. The right wing dipped. The heavy airframe groaned in protest, a deep, structural creak that resonated through the floor, grating directly into the soles of her boots. The right engine, the only one still producing thrust, whined in a high, uneven pitch, struggling to push the massive weight of the plane through the dense, lower atmosphere air. To her right, First Officer Ben Williams gasped loudly, ripping his oxygen mask off. The cabin altitude had normalized as they dropped below 10,000 feet. The smoke in the cockpit was slowly venting out through the outflow valves, leaving behind a bitter, stinging haze and the overwhelming smell of charred insulation. Williams blinked, his eyes bloodshot and wide. He looked at the shattered primary flight display, then at the unconscious captain on the floor, and finally at Camilla. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. Who are you? Nobody, Camilla said. She didn't look at him. Her eyes flicked rapidly between the artificial horizon, the airspeed indicator, and the altimeter. Get your hands on the flaps lever. Williams just stared at her, his hand still trembling uselessly in his lap. We're going down. The avionics. We are flying, Camilla snapped, her tone carrying the absolute, unquestionable authority of a ranking officer on a flight line. Are you a pilot or a passenger? Because if you're a passenger, get out of the seat. If you're a pilot, put your hand on the flaps. The harshness of the command bypassed Williams's panic, plugging directly into years of conditioned simulator training. His right hand reached out, shaking violently, and wrapped around the flap handle. Good, Camilla said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, stabilizing him. She didn't offer comfort. Comfort bred hesitation. Run the engine out checklist. Read it aloud. Do not skip a single word. Williams pulled the laminated quick reference handbook from the side pocket. His voice cracked as he began to read. Engine fire, severe damage, or separation. Execute, Camilla ordered. They worked in a rigid, terrifying rhythm. Williams read the steps. Camilla confirmed the actions. She isolated the left engine, cutting the fuel flow and arming the fire suppression bottles. She had no idea if the fire in the bay was actually extinguished, but the acrid smell wasn't getting worse. That was the only metric she had the luxury of trusting. The aircraft was crippled. It yawed heavily to the dead left side, requiring constant, exhausting pressure on the right rudder pedal to keep them flying straight. Camilla's right leg was beginning to twitch from the sustained isometric hold. She bit the inside of her cheek, focusing on the sharp, metallic taste in her mouth to distract herself from the muscle fatigue. Halifax Tower, Flight 402, she called out. We are on approach, 20 miles out. We are coming in heavy. We will not be able to vacate the runway. Roll the trucks. 402 Halifax, a Canadian controller answered, their voice clipped and tense. Winds are 290 at 35 knots, gusting to 45. You have a direct crosswind. Cleared to land runway 23. Camilla checked the airspeed. They were moving too fast. Without the left engine, she couldn't rely on the autothrottle to manage the delicate balance of speed and drag. If they came in too hot, they would blow the tires and skid off the runway into the mud. If they came in too slow, the heavy, unbalanced plane would simply fall out of the sky. Gear down, she ordered. Williams slammed the heavy lever downward. 3 distinct massive thuds echoed through the belly of the plane as the landing gear deployed and locked. The sudden increase in drag felt like someone had thrown a parachute out the back door. The nose immediately tried to pitch down. Camilla hauled back on the yoke, grunting audibly as her biceps strained against the dead weight. Through the windshield, there was nothing but a solid, oppressive wall of slate-grey clouds. The wipers slapped frantically against the glass, smearing condensation and soot. They were completely blind, dropping toward the earth at 140 knots, trusting entirely in the flickering instrument landing system on the center console. 1,000 feet, Williams called out, his voice thin. Camilla didn't respond. She felt the heavy chop of the crosswind hitting the fuselage. The plane shoved violently to the left. She kicked the right rudder, fighting the invisible current. Flying a fighter jet was an extension of thought. Flying this was a bar fight. 500! The grey cloud suddenly tore apart. There it was. Runway 23. A thick slab of wet asphalt, bordered by strobe lights cutting aggressively through the gloom. It wasn't lined up with the nose. Because of the extreme crosswind, the plane was crabbing, flying almost sideways. The nose pointed 30 degrees to the right, just to maintain a straight path over the ground. You have to kick it straight, Williams whispered, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles were white. You have to decrab before touchdown, or the gear will snap." "I know how physics work," Camilla muttered, her jaw clenched tight. The runway numbers, a massive white 23, rushed up to meet them. The ground proximity warning system began its sterile, terrifying countdown. 50, 40, 30. Camilla slammed the left rudder pedal forward, violently twisting the nose of the 300,000-pound aircraft back into alignment with the runway. At the exact same moment, she shoved the yoke into the wind, dipping the right wing to keep the crosswind from flipping them over. 20, 10. There was no delicate flare. There was no gentle settling of rubber onto concrete. The right main landing gear smashed into the tarmac with the subtle grace of a dropped shipping container. The impact was horrific. The entire cockpit violently shook, throwing Camilla hard against her shoulder harness. The plastic casing of the overhead panel cracked, raining small pieces of white debris onto her lap. A split second later, the left gear slammed down. The aircraft bounced, a terrifying, shuddering leap back into the air. "Hold it down!" Williams screamed. Camilla shoved the yoke forward, pinning the nose wheel to the runway. "Speed brakes up! Reversers!" she roared over the deafening scream of metal and wind. Williams yanked the speed brake lever. Camilla grabbed the right thrust lever, hauling it back into reverse. The single functional engine roared in agony, fighting its own forward momentum. Without the left engine to balance the braking force, the plane immediately tried to violently swerve off the left side of the runway. Camilla stomped on the right brake pedal with both feet, standing up in her seat, using every ounce of her body weight to force the heavy machine to stay on the pavement. The anti-skid system rattled like a jackhammer beneath their feet. The smell of burning rubber and superheated carbon brake pads instantly flooded the cockpit, overpowering the lingering scent of the electrical fire. The noise was absolute. A chaotic, teeth-rattling roar of reverse thrust, screaming tires and vibrating metal. Outside the window, the runway edge lights became a blur, then distinct dots, then finally, agonizingly, individual fixtures. The speed bled off. 100 knots, 80, 50. With a final violent lurch, the Boeing 777 ground to a complete and sudden halt. The abrupt absence of forward motion was jarring. The massive engine spooled down into a low, dying whine. The frantic vibration of the airframe ceased. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the cockpit was the localized pinging of cooling metal, the steady hiss of the heavy rain hitting the windshield, and the synthetic voice of the master caution alarm, still stubbornly flashing red. Camilla slowly let go of the yoke. Her fingers remained curled in tight, rigid hooks. They wouldn't straighten. Her joints ached with a deep, throbbing intensity. She stared at her hands for a long moment, watching a fine, involuntary tremor shake her wrists. She wasn't relieved. She felt hollowed out, utterly drained of whatever chemical reserves had kept her functioning for the last 20 minutes. Williams unbuckled his harness. He leaned over the center console and threw up violently onto the floor grating. Camilla didn't blink. She reached up and flipped the battery switches to off. The blaring alarms finally died. The cockpit plunged into total silence, save for the rain. Behind them, the heavy reinforced door opened. Sarah, the flight attendant, stood in the galley. Her face was ashen, her uniform stained. She looked at the unconscious captain, at Williams wiping his mouth, and then at Camilla. "We're down," Sarah whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Deploy the slides," Camilla said. Her voice sounded thin, raspy. "Get them out. The brakes are cooking. We might still catch fire." Sarah nodded numbly and disappeared back into the cabin. A moment later, the loud, compressed air pop of the emergency slides deploying echoed from the rear doors. Camilla unclipped her harness. The metal buckle felt icy against her damp skin. She pushed herself up from the left seat. Her legs wobbled, the muscles trembling uncontrollably now that they no longer had to fight the rudder pedals. She grabbed the back of the seat to steady herself. She looked down at Captain Howard. His chest was rising and falling in a steady, albeit shallow, rhythm. He would live. Williams was wiping his mouth with the back of his sleeve, looking up at her with a mixture of profound awe and deep shame. You saved us. All of us. Camilla looked at him. She didn't feel like a savior. She felt like a woman whose jeans were soaked in lukewarm ginger ale, whose back was killing her, and who was now going to be stuck in Halifax, Nova Scotia, for the next 3 days dealing with federal investigators. "I just wanted to get off the plane," she said. She stepped over the captain's legs, pushed past the galley where passengers were already screaming and shoving toward the exits, and walked down the inflatable yellow slide into the freezing, bitter wind. She didn't look back at the aircraft. She reached into her jacket pocket, her rigid fingers fumbling blindly until she found a crushed pack of cigarettes. She pulled one out, placed it between her lips, and stood in the wet grass, waiting for the sirens to arrive. Did Camilla's raw, cynical survival instinct keep you on the edge of your seat? The reality of an emergency is rarely glamorous. It's exhausting, messy, and brutally human. If you loved this intense, grounded take on a mid-air disaster, hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with a friend who loves aviation thrillers. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, realistic stories that show what really happens when the autopilot fails.